I am now live, apparently. Hello, everybody. It's your boy. Now, I don't know how long this lecture. It was just. It's not a lecture. It's really my opinion. It's a rant, really. I don't know how long this stream is going to be. It could be 10 minutes. It could be 25 minutes. It could be. It could be like an hour long. I don't know. It depends how long I manage to get all this stuff off my chest. Because a few weeks back, it was definitely a few weeks back. A post which I will be showing. I won't go through it all. In fact, I might not go through it at all. It's just a reference. I might go through little bits that reference me and another Mancunian who was in the YouTube political sphere for a while. I might do that bit, but it's so unreadable because it's just a load of spurgy nonsense for a certain angry German that I don't know if it's worth going through all. So like, it's a reference point, and if the person thinks that Kraut, by the way, if you think that I'm picking on you, that I'm starting shit and throwing shade, no, I'm not. This is actually just an opinion sharing stream. It's not about you. It's about the things that you bring up. So it's not a personal attack. Calm down, have a cup of tea, and just don't worry about it, man. Don't worry. It's not about you. Technically, it's not even about me, although it is about my opinion. So, anyway, I'm going to start off with what even is the skeptic community. How did this phrase come about, and why is it referred to certain people, certain individuals who, in actuality, and even back in the day, 5 to 6 years ago, why was it applied to people who, even back then, were polar opposites in many regards? There were people who were obviously politically completely separate from each other, just that there were certain things they agreed upon, but it's not something you could build a movement on. It wasn't something you could build a community around. This isn't, for example, like the commentary community, where they're all talking about the same old cringe constantly, whether that be from the beauty community, TikTok, and back then it wouldn't have been the beauty, well, it would have been the beauty community to some extent, but it would have been mainly dunking on kids, cringe stuff on the internet, weird people that went viral, prank channels, things like that. But there's a general gist. Oh, and drama, obviously. So the commentary community, they have things in common, don't they, that they talk about, and to some extent, despite being very cliquey, there's something there in the content that they definitely do. There is an element of continuity, to quote Clossington, between I Am Alex, Leafy is here, back in the day, rest in peace, Pyrocynical, to some extent Drama Alert, all those people, all the commentary community channels you can possibly think of, and even the newer ones, like my friend Procrastitara. Like, there's things that bind them all together, and subjects come up again and again and again, and certain traits. That's what binds them all. They comment on drama and goings on in the internet culture, shall we say. I was making it appear much bigger than it actually is. Actually more, I guess, highbrow, when commentary community is probably the lowest of the low. Take a chill pill, you whinger. Exactly. So, I was doing a little bit of digging. I thought, when I was thinking about this stream, I need to do a little bit of digging, so I went on Google Trends, and I discovered something kind of interesting when you type in skeptic community. Now, unfortunately, Google Trends doesn't allow me to actually click on the 100 things, so I don't actually know where I'm going to find all these 100 hits or 1,000. I don't know how the graph actually works. I assume it's actually more than 100, but I'll just show you now. This is kind of fascinating. Look, if you can see there, as far back as I can go, which is 2004, although I could probably go back even further, the skeptic community has been a thing since 2004. In fact, it hit its peak in terms of people looking for it in 2004, in August 2004, I think that is. Now, why is that? What is that? What is this skeptic community? And what is the skeptic community of 2008 and 2013 or 2011, really? And then 2016, 2015. In fact, it's completely dead in 2014. Nobody's talking about it. And then obviously in 2017, blood sports. But what's the difference? Well, I'll tell you what the difference is. That is the actual Skeptic community in 2004. All this bit here. And if anybody knows your cultural history, you will know that this was around about the time where there was the debates between the new atheists and the fundamentalist Christians over religion. And also there was, Islamic scholars and Jewish scholars involved. It was more than just Christianity versus atheism. It was generally like humanists, atheists. You might even include deists and other kind of connected spheres and philosophies against established religion. Essentially, it was the established religions of the Abrahamic faiths, and they were debating over what was, in the new millennium, the role of the church and the state, and should the church have more influence in education on a state level, or should it be confined to the private sphere of church schools or Islamic schools or Jewish faith schools and things like that. And that's why you see all these big hits here, because that was the crest of the wave, I guess. And then slowly, obviously, towards the end, as Christopher Hitchens died and was sick, and the others moved on, and Dawkins did other things, and Sam Hyde did other things, and Daniel Dennett disappeared. You see, it just disappeared for ages. And in fact, it only reappeared in 2011, after Hitchens died, and in 2012, and then up to October 2014, you get nothing. But before that, in September, you get a little bit. Now, why is that? Well, that's Atheism Plus. Now, Atheism Plus actually really died out in around 2012, but I assume there must have been some atheist infighting going on at the time. Now, what was Atheism Plus? Well, you see, after the initial publications of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and all the subsequent debates and interesting goings on YouTube and things like that, they were really called the atheist community, but they were also called the skeptic community as well. There was an influx of people, and in fact, in Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, The God Delusion. Is it The God Delusion? I need to double check that actually. It is The God Delusion, I'm pretty sure. He mentions a certain person called P.Z. Myers. Now, who is P.Z. Myers? P.Z. Myers is one of the patient zero SJWs, at least in terms of at least in the 21st century. And he was the one who coined the term maybe he didn't coin it, but he certainly popularised it, the term Atheism Plus. And Atheism Plus was the far left social justice infiltration of the atheist community. And this is where people assume there's continuity. This is actually completely separate from everything else that has gone on, believe it or not. And what they did was try to say, well, atheism can just be about debating religion and trying to debate morality and science and things like that, and Marxism. Now, of course, most atheists in that community, although they were left-wing, there were, of course, libertarians, right-wing libertarians, slightly conservative atheists, and, people like Douglas Murray is an atheist, and I think he was tangentially involved in the debates around this time as well, to some extent. And there was also Marxists at the time that didn't like the new atheists. I forgot his name, but there was a guy who I was just looking up this author called John Gray that I've mentioned in a few videos, and this Marxist didn't particularly like one of his books or praised one of his books, and he wasn't a fan of the new atheists because he thought they didn't know a thing about theology. Now, I know that Daniel Dennett's actually pretty knowledgeable on it, if I remember correctly. That's what I've heard. And, Sam Hyde's not ignorant, but, a lot of the rank and file definitely were ignorant, and you can definitely see where his criticism was coming from. So it's not just to say that it was a complete Marxist infiltration. There were other Marxists at the time, because that guy was more of an old school class-based one. But this was the cultural Marxists infiltrating, and these came under the guise of the Skeptics and other groups like that, headed by Rebecca Watson. And they tore asunder the community. Most famously, this is represented by Thunderfoot, who was not happy about them basically derailing the atheist movement, because they'd been on a momentum and were potentially about to make some cultural change, and he thought, look, it should be about debating matters of church and state and religion and science and things like that. All this stuff is completely separate. it's not something that we need to be talking about. You can do that in your own spare time, but it's got nothing to do with the actual movement's goals. But unfortunately, he didn't bank on the rest of the movement being very, I guess you could say they were very sympathetic to these people. Not in the sense that they believed every single word, but they were more willing to listen to them and give them a platform and allow them in here, allow them into the community and let them have their say. And unfortunately, these people would end up being silenced by these Marxists, and people who stood up like Thunderfoot were silenced and attacked and essentially driven out. But he wasn't the only person. There was another community that formed around about that time called the Slime Pit, and those people are probably other reasons why there's slightly more hits. And they were essentially the old school atheists who were not cultural Marxists, who were forced out of the movement. And as you can probably tell, the atheist community is now dead, because that's what social justice does to vibrant communities online and to interesting and important cultural movements. They did the same thing to Occupy, and now they've done the same thing to the atheist community. In fact, it was roughly around about the same time both things were occurring. Isn't that interesting? But anyway, the only continuity really is Thunderfoot. There's one individual, but the actual event from Atheism Plus to Gamergate there is no continuity. One YouTuber commenting on Gamergate and getting tangentially involved, because he'd criticised feminism and feminist frequency for a long time, but loads of gamers had done for years before Gamergate, because I think Anita Sarkeesian came to prominence in 2012, 2013, so way before Gamergate. There's no real continuity. There's no saying, well, this event led to this from the atheist community that led to Gamergate. There isn't. There were people involved on both sides who inserted themselves into it for their own reasons, but by and large, there's nothing that says, well, say for example the German Reich, right? The Second Reich and the Third Reich. There is continuity there, although some people disagree. The idea of Sonderweg. Well, you can say Germany's actions in the 1870s up to the 1910s influenced World War One, which then made them lose the war, which resulted in the Treaty of Versailles and blah, 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 right? These are events that you can definitely argue are continuous and have a link in history, but there's nothing that I've seen that links, aside from individuals, there are no events that link Gamergate to Atheism Plus. There is nothing. There's no continuity there. Only individuals who took it upon themselves from both sides to get involved. Now, even then, Gamergate was its own thing. It's actually separate from another controversy which did eventually create it, but that's only because other things were discovered. So this is the Five Guys Burgers and Fries drama. Now, for those of you who don't remember, before Gamergate, Zoe Quinn was well known way before that, and in fact she was already up to her old tricks even back then. She was harassing essentially early incel groups, Wizard-chan they're called. They're like a group of depressed, or at least I don't know if they're still around, they're like a group of depressed men who like, what was Wizard-chan all about? It was kind of like an internet community about video games, maybe. I don't know, it was something really niche, but they were essentially incels who couldn't, we would call them incels now, but maybe not, but they were depressed. And they were depressed, and they criticised Depression Crest, which came out, I think, a few years before Gamergate, and she sicked her followers on them, and which were a hell of a lot of feminists. And she attacked the fine young capitalists, I think about a year or two before Gamergate, or maybe around about the same year. And at the same time, she was in a relationship with one Erin Joney. Now, Erin Joney was the man who basically made most people aware of her, and he released a blog post entitled The Zoe Post, where he details her emotional and physical, well, maybe not physical, but emotional abuse at the very least at the hands of her. And she cheated on him with 5 guys. Now, maybe that's where I got the physical bit from, because in her opinion, cheating on somebody is technically rape, which I guess means it's abusive. So technically, by her own logic, although she would never apply this to herself, she raped Erin Joney. So he'd said that there were certain games journalists who she slept with in order to get good reviews and things like that, and favours. And one of them was a guy named Nathan Grayson. There was a few others. Devin Faraci, I think, was another guy who... I think Devin Faraci may have been one of the guys who've been outed as a bit of a sex pest, but I might be wrong on that. Alright? I might be wrong. It might be another person. He might not have been one of the 5 guys. But what we discovered through investigations, that yes, there was impropriety with these people, and she was getting favourable reviews, and we did find out that yes, Nathan Grayson was cheating with her at the time that he wrote his review, which the Kotaku editor-in-chief denied, and what he denied and all the others denied, but we've discovered that since. It was very quickly discovered in around about like January. Where was it? Like not August, more about like July. And then what happened was this. If I remember correctly, there was an event where we discovered there was. I think the criticism just began to heat up as we discovered that these people were not... I think it was more of a venting, really, because for years there was social justice stuff happening since 2011 in the gaming press, and it developed a fever pitch in the community, and then eventually there was the famous dropping of the headlines. I'm probably missing a lot of stuff, where basically in one day 28 publications published "Gamers are dead, gamers don't need to be your audience," all across the board, and this was very, very scary. What the hell is going on? How the hell has this happened? What is going on? These are meant to be competing publications, yet they're all releasing the exact same thing against their own audience, trying to kill their own audience. And as it turns out, I think it was Milo Yiannopoulos or somebody else, or at least he published it, there was a Games Journals pros list. Now what's that? That was a message board, or a message list, like an emailing list, where journalists from supposedly competing publications basically work together to coordinate stories and how they're going to create narratives. That's essentially what they were doing. Now, of course, the SAW's hand waved and said, it's the industry, they're just communicating with each other to find jobs and stuff, which no, that's not what it was. Again, it's not a coincidence that this thing was discovered and at the same time they were coordinating headlines and articles and things like that, okay? This doesn't make sense. That's what created Gamergate. But that's completely separate from the atheist community, although it is cultural Marxism, that is the one link, and certain individuals. But the two events couldn't be more separate. But anyway, Gamergate was formed because we discovered that the problem went far beyond just impropriety and potential journalists not doing their jobs properly. This was a rot at the core of games journalism. And so a consumer revolt was enacted in an attempt to ameliorate it, and it didn't work. There were initial successes. We cost Gawker for like over 6-figure sums through an ad campaign attack. It was Gamergate, ironically, that pioneered tactics of going after adverts and other companies, things like that, in order to get their revenue, to make a point, which you could argue the SJWs learned from and created cancel culture as a result of that. Because look at the tactics. I mean, to be fair, they were doing similar things before then, getting people fired and things like that, but against actual companies, they've been doing that as well. They do that to everybody. BLM was doing it to Wendy's and other companies like that if they did anything wrong. They've learnt from that. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? I mean, maybe that's just a push too far. But anyway, still, there was no such thing as the Skeptic community around about this time. Nobody was using the term. Nobody. No Gamergater called themselves that. It was just Gamergate. And that was, I think, a legitimate community. Because, despite all the different political differences, we all were gamers. It was all about being gamers and trying to make gaming and the industry and the media better. That's really what it was all about. And until there was a slight split with Gamergate Revolt, who were just a bunch of just spurgs. They were a bit more on the right, I think, those guys, you would call them, but they really were just spurgs who in some ways were correct in the sense that the issue was more than just games journalism. But unfortunately for them, Gamergate was a very niche movement that had its own goals. And unfortunately, they were going to have to go against the left in their own time. But they thought they could do both ethics and games journalism and going after SJWs. But the movement couldn't do both because it was not coordinated. There were no leaders. Even as more people like Sargon and Jim and everybody else rose to prominence, they weren't actually directing anything. They were just making videos and trying to, signal boost operations and things like that. That's what we were trying to do. Now, Gamergate pretty much died in 2015, although it trudged along slowly until the early 2016. And that's when you start hearing about the Skeptic community, because some of the people on YouTube who were feminists kind of earned their chops to some extent, kind of gained their chops in like the atheist community at the time, and it was them who tried to create the idea that there's some kind of continuity between Atheism Plus and the Slime Pit and Thunderfoot with these new people who, by the way, some of them were atheists, but not all of them were atheists. So why is it that a bunch of people who are either not atheists because they're either agnostic or just don't know, don't care, or are religious, mainly Christians, why are they being grouped in with these new atheists? It's because that's what the left does. They don't see individuals, if they see groups, they don't see cliques forming, they see political groups, they see political formations, and they don't differentiate. So we were all grouped in together, regardless of our political beliefs, regardless of our social and religious beliefs, as this is the Skeptic community. This is the last vestiges of the old atheist community who were against us, rising up again thanks to Gamergate. These right-wingers, these evil fascists and Nazis. But they couldn't have been... But the people within these cliques couldn't be further apart from each other. They couldn't have been any different. So as you can see, it only really reached the peak in 2017, and that was because of the Angry Germans thing. So let's go to his thing. Let's go to Kraut's thing. Now, funnily enough, this is about Shoe on Head. This isn't the Kiwi Farms Shoe on Head thing, and to paraphrase it as best as I can, because look, I can't read this wall of text. Jesus Christ, mate. You're fluent in both languages, but your grammar's appalling. But anyway, the gist of it was the so-called Skeptic community failed because they were talking about things that they weren't particularly educated on, which is ironic because he's not educated. He's not educated to high school senior level. He hasn't got a degree, but whatever. Nobody was educated on the matter, on like philosophy and politics and science and things like that. Even though there were people like that, and that was part of the downfall. People were talking about things that they didn't understand, and he calls me in Cognitive Thought skeptics, and that we were apparently we were familiar to more low quality drama streamers like a guy called Chud Logic, which, by the way, he of all people should have known that I did far more than just drama back in the day, and he knows that I've never called myself a skeptic, and I've always denied that the skeptic community ever existed. So he's being really disingenuous there when he says that I'm a quote-unquote skeptic. That's just not true. And I'm nothing like Cognitive Thought either. He is an actual drama channel now, I think. Or at least he does commentary. I don't know. But it doesn't really matter what he does. It's his own channel. And then there was another thing that he mentioned, that the community, that the so-called community wasn't willing to gatekeep, I guess, to keep the alt-right out. But the thing is, there was no community to gatekeep, and there was no community to brainwash, to infiltrate. That's why all these cliques, all these individuals split apart so easily, because there was nothing really binding them together, like philosophically and politically. Ultimately, why do you think the people in that thumbnail all split up in their own separate ways, even more than they already were? It was because ultimately they weren't united, didn't all believe the same things. There was hardly anything, anti-feminism and and to some extent anti-SJW stuff. It's not enough. It's not enough. I mean, the alt-right back in the day were also anti-feminist, but there was nothing that did not unite them with so-called skeptics, did it, guys? It didn't. So anyway, I'm just going to look at the chat while I gather my thoughts on the matter. Oh, I've got a super chat, sorry. Edil Kenidal. I only thought about you half a shandy. Thank you, it all adds up in the end. Every little helps, thank you very much. Kraut is a neo-lib globalist, he's an 80s, 2000 establishment type. No, he's a socialist. Fuck the skeptic grifting fucks. Sips from skeptic clone mug, exactly, Megan. You can't have a completely negative movement without having some positive beliefs, filling the void, whether it's socialism or Nietzschean will to power. True, Clossington, but there's no philosophy to the so-called skeptic community. There's nothing that binds them all together. Kraut's because of Spurg against. I can't read that British Knight. Sorry. Oh, hi, Lauren. Because if you're not an if you're not SJW Marxist, you must be a fascist bigot. Well, we all know that, don't we? Hello, Sir Adamantine. I always cringe when I heard the term skeptic community. Now look. Now the reason why there isn't a skeptic community is this. As I mentioned before, there is no philosophy that binds all these so-called skeptics together. So what is it? Is it liberalism, as in old school liberalism? Because a lot of people call themselves classical liberals, but not everybody was a classical liberal in this so-called sphere. So there were traditionalists at the time who, until they split up and went into their own various ways, some of them became the new NRX community, some of them became, I guess you could say, alt-right. Some of them went down the Tradcath route. But by and large, what is it? I can't tell you, even back then, what binded me and Shoeonhead together, when we were actually probably closer politically than we are now. I couldn't tell you what it was. What was it? Nobody can tell me. There is no philosophy that binds it, because it was purely... it was a reaction that had to happen, obviously. It was a reaction against the leftist establishment and their encroachment upon culture. That's what it was. But unfortunately, it was uncoordinated, because it was a load of people kind of grasping at the issues and trying to, get their voices heard and things like that. But by and large, there was no coordination. We were all in our little cliques, but there's nothing we could do. And we weren't well. And people like me and Sargon and Omegan in the chat and other people there that I've probably missed out. What could we do when we're just in our own little friendship groups and we can't reach out to actual organisations that can do things? We don't have... I think Sargon's planning to do some kind of organisation. I think it's more of a media one. He wants to do an office or set up a studio and things like that. But none of the people from that time have attempted to create think tanks and things like... the Liberalists was an attempt by Sargon to create a sort of caucus in the UKIP, or even its own political party, but it takes years for that to develop, and none of us had the experience of doing that. And hello, Tallytail. Ooh, spooky. Hang on a sec, let me get Steam on, because I've got a sound pad now, guys, and you're all going to listen to it, because yes, the skeptic community is a spook. Now, for those of you who don't know what a spook is, I will tell you what a spook is. I'll just get Kraut off, because you don't need to see him now. He was only a reference. Spook. Max Stirner. Now, a spook is a spook. It proposes that most commonly accepted social institutions, including the notion of state property as a right, natural rights in general, and the very notion of society, were mere illusions, spooks, or ghosts in the mind. Now, it doesn't just mean property as a right and rights and things like that. It can mean literally anything that you believe in. That's something you would die for, essentially. So, would you die for, say, for example, universal healthcare? Well, universal healthcare is a spook, isn't it? Now, to me, the skeptic community is a spook. I'll show you my spooky thing. Hang on. You love this, guys.
Ooh. Uh-oh. Spooky. Boo.
No, I'm not going to play the whole thing. Also, I've actually got a Kraut. I've actually got a Kraut soundbite.
Shut up.
Deep lore for those of you there. So, anyway, I'm going to get back on topic. Now, there was no binding philosophy. There was nothing that bound people together in a natural community where things have been coordinated to affect social change. It's just people really giving their opinions and hoping that social change enacts, that somehow people will influence politicians. But there was also... oh no. What was I going to say? It was in my head. There was no philosophy. There was also no... well, there was no organisation, obviously. There was... God, what was it that I was going to say? Oh, what was it? I'm losing my mind. I'm trying to remember what was in my head, because there was no binding philosophy. Oh yeah, there was no community. Why was there no community? Why was it so hard to infiltrate? Why did people like Edgy Sphinx, who was used over and over again as like an example of an infiltrator? Why was he unable to get people to his cause, or at least enough numbers to increase Coof. Excuse me, guys. Why is it that he couldn't do that? Well, it was because it was fractured, and there was people all over the place doing things of their own accord. There was no leaders, really. Sargon is not a leader of anything. Shoenhead was not a leader of anything. Chris Reagan was not a leader of anything. They were just people who had their own YouTube communities in their channels, and they had crossover. There's no structure. There wasn't even a groundwork. There was no grassroots of any kind. There was nothing that you could grasp at to infiltrate. There was nothing. Because again, people were different and just wanting a relief. I think ultimately what people referred to as a skeptic community, it was just people creating content that was like a release, that people could see that other people were thinking the same things that they were. And that was one of it. I can't believe I'm beginning to lose my brain dead. I'm having a brain dead moment right now because I had something really good that I wanted to say. And like, so there was ultimately I think the fact that the likes of Shoenhead, Chris Reagan, poisoning the well, not poisoning the well as a whole, but Soulfane and loads of other people, and then there were also people who went to the alt-right side of things. I mean, I can't, like Edgy Sphinx always was, but there were people like, and there were a few alt-righters who claimed to be part of the skeptic community. Why is it that these people polarised and pushed apart? That alone suggests there wasn't really one, because if there was a community, there would have been some kind of conformity. That's what I mean. There was no ideological conformity. Now that was really by design. In a way, people didn't want echo chambers. People didn't want to conform. They wanted to say the thing that they wanted to say. They wanted to critique the people they wanted to critique. And if that meant critiquing people that on the surface seemed to agree with them on everything, so be it. And in that sense, there couldn't have been a community, because there was too much self-criticism and criticism of other people, and it created conflict where there was none. Not necessarily between YouTubers, but between the fans. It was always the fans that used to get incensed about that stuff like that. Now, why was it that out of all the labels that could have stuck, why was it the skeptic community? Why was it not the anti-feminist community? Why was it not the anti-SJW community, which has been used occasionally? But why was it that? And I think, again, it comes from the fact that a lot of the feminists who gained prominence, people like, ContraPoints, and not Peter Coffin, but definitely some of the bread tubers here had, again, come from the atheist community. They come from Atheism Plus. And they wanted to create an enemy, but they couldn't create an enemy because there was loads of different people coming at them at the same time, including other Marxists. Because what people don't remember, I don't know if this is the case now, but on 8chan, the lefty poll board were anti-SJW, yet they were Marxists. Now, obviously, it's weird, but look, guys, communists have always fought each other. Just, that's all you need to know. Now, it was convenient for them to create a boogeyman. Gamergate was already one anyway, but they noticed that there was something going on. The intellectual thought leaders definitely saw that there was something that could become a movement against them. They saw that there was something on YouTube going on, and so they preemptively called it the Skeptic community. And it was just purely a label to group loads of people in so that they could attack it as a group. Because again, it's very hard to go after an individual and their audience, but it's very easy to go after a group, if you think about it. It was just easier for them, and that's how they operate. For example, there was technically no such thing as a kulak in the Soviet Union. Kulaks were not a thing. What a kulak means is it's a stingy person. A kulak is a person who is stingy, but it became a class. A kulak became stingy person to a peasant that owned land. But a kulak technically was not a community. It was not a thing. These peasants weren't all the same who owned land. Some of them were socialists. Some of them were capitalists. Some of them were neither. And that's the exact same thing with the Skeptic community. They created a community out of thin air, despite all the differences between the people inside of it, where even though it never actually existed, they did it purely so they could attack them. You're very stingy, are you, Sadako? That's purely what it is. It's leftism 101. It was to create a target to attack. And it became a convenient category for the alt-right and other people who aren't alt-right or even SJWs but just don't like, I guess, liberals? Or people who espouse similar views to me or Sargon or Dr. Andamacam or whatever. It was just an easy brush to tar certain people to attack them. That's what it was. That's all it ever was. It was a term devised by the enemy to denote something that they couldn't discern. Because remember, leftists are collectivists, and they don't watch and read other people's literature and videos and other opinions, so they group everybody in the same. Remember, Marxists think that if you're not a Marxist, at least these ones anyway, most of them anyway, you're a fascist. And that's just what they're doing there. I'm not that smart. I just had a brain fart, McClure. Forgot what I was going to say. Now, that's one reason why I think it never actually existed. Because again, you can't tell me what me and all these other people have in common, aside from one thing. But even then, they've all walked back on it, a lot of these people. Or were they ever really anti-feminist to begin with? Was Shuan Head really anti-feminist even back then? Or just disagreed with them on certain topics? But even then, she's kind of disagreeing with herself on those very topics. And I think that speaks volumes, doesn't it? Because, a lot of these so-called skeptics made a lot of excuses for feminism. Not modern feminism, not the third or fourth wave, whatever you want to call it. But they made excuses for the second wave and the first wave because, the second wave brought in sexual emancipation and birth control and things. Well, birth control wasn't invented by them. They probably popularised it, made it legal. And then the first wave obviously brought in left the vote. But they would always ignore the fact that a lot of the stuff that these SJWs, these bedroom feminists as they call them, were talking about and what they were saying came from the second wave and to some extent the first wave, but particularly the second wave. Bell hooks that everybody knows influenced Anita Sarkeesian and all these other feminists that we know about was second wave. But they were always, there was excuses always made about them because apparently they were good. And people forget that one of the most famous figures of that time was a second wave feminist, Christina Hoff Sommers, even Camille Paglia, although whether or not she's a real feminist, I don't know. Yeah, she was getting buddy Zio. She's been on the stream, she's kissed the foot of him, she's kissed his ring, she's admitted her sins. Now, I'm going to try and think of other things before I go about why there was none. Again, maybe I should have made a proper video on this. I had it all in my head and it's all just starting to slowly evaporate. So if you guys want to ask me questions to try and drum up my brain to get me going again, that would be really helpful. Ask me about certain ideological things, certain sociological factors, anything like that, because I'm going to need it to remember what it is that I want to talk about sometimes. So there's that. So there is no continuity between the atheist community and the so-called skeptic community, because truth be told, I know very few people who were even involved in the atheist community at the time. Very few. And even then, they've never said that there was a continuity. Like Sargon wasn't a part of it. Only Thunderfoot was. Now, was there anybody else in the YouTube sphere who transitioned to that kind of content? There was Thunderfoot. I think there was Amazing Atheist, but he only did it for the views, as it turned out. Like, he's now pretty much a feminist at this point. He's a leftist, even more so than he used to be. But he only did it to jump on the bandwagon because his channel's dying, essentially. And as we now know, a lot of people jumped on this bandwagon, this thing to grow audiences, because, as it turned out, because there's no community, because it's not really a genre of YouTube, you can do this thing attacking this particular ideology or these particular group of people who everybody agrees, or at least most people agree, are retarded, and then slowly build up your audience and make other content, and then completely switch, and nobody would have been on the wiser. Until you open your mouth on Twitter, that is. So that's about that when it comes to the no skeptic community thing. Now, who, out of all the people that you've watched back in the day, how many of them actually called themselves skeptics in terms of skeptical of feminism, skeptical of this? I'm remembering now what I wanted to say. Who call themselves, oh yeah, we're part of this community, we're part of a skeptic community, this does exist, it's all here, we're all friends, we're all family, we're all part of this thing, and we're going to push to end leftism, things like that. No, never happened. Anytime people talked about it, it was always the skeptic community. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm doing the air quotes. Why would everybody do air quotes and in quotations every time they talk about it? Because deep down, everybody knew, most people anyway, knew Ahmed Skeptic was whatever, he'll do anything for views. He wasn't even a part of it anyway. He wasn't part of the anti-SJW thing. He was an atheist YouTuber who came in late. I'll get to him in a little while, because I think he did use it semi-unironically once. People only ever used it ironically, or sarcastically, or in quotations, because deep down, everybody knew it wasn't a thing. There was no coordination. There was no conformity. Now, the reason why there's an NRX community, why there's a feminist community, why there's a communist community, why there's... although feminists and communists are the same, why there's was an alt-right community, is because there were people who were very clearly ideological thought leaders, and there were people who very clearly believed in most things, in terms of philosophy, politics, and social issues, and they formed their own groups, and they would, have purity spirals or criticism and debate, depending on which community it was, and they would come to consensus. But of course, there was no consensus in this so-called community. Again, someone like me, I don't think any of feminism's good. I don't think any of the waves were good. Like, the vote aside, contraception aside, although even the vote is kind of, to some people, somewhat shaky ground. Like, was the vote even worth it, considering what that caused for politics? Things like that. I don't think any of the waves ultimately were a good thing for society. But people like Shu thought that all but the third wave were good. Some people thought that the ideology itself wasn't bad necessarily. It was just that these people weren't real feminists. These people were just bigots. Some people hated the second wave and the third wave, but didn't hate the first wave. You see what I mean? There's no nothing. There's no opinion. Nobody could even agree on how bad feminism actually was and which feminism we're going to fight. So how could we be good anti-feminists if some of us could only attack a certain wave? So there's that. Again, and people in the NRX community, because I know that Clossington, I don't know if you're necessarily part of it, but you know people in it, they can tell you, most people think this. We know who our opposition is. We know generally the consensus is on these issues and who we read and whose our influence is. But everybody who is called a skeptic has a completely different idea of what it means to be a skeptic, and a completely different idea what it is to be an anti-feminist, and a completely different idea on how they're going to bring about a different society than what we already have. Yeah, Lauren, in America, yeah, they wanted it only for white women. Yeah. That's the thing. And then another thing was the people who used it unironically. Now, the people who used it unironically, I think they genuinely were looking for a community. I think there were two different types. There were those who, looking for belonging. They were looking for belonging, they were looking for comradeship, they were looking for people who believed in the things that they believed in, because, in a lot of places in the West, it's very isolating to believe the things that you believe about leftism and things like that, it is. So you will, if you're somebody who craves that, human interaction, it's not attention, it's just, comradeship, people. To not feel alone, I can see why you would want to believe in it. But for people like Armored Skeptic, who I don't think he really believed in it, but maybe he did at one time, it was less about fighting this political problem and only about himself. Because I remember in that Shoe on Head Armored Skeptic thread on Kiwi Farms, there's a guy who mentions that apparently, allegedly, now I don't know if this is true, but if Sargon is watching, or Greenwood Outlaw, anybody here who may have been involved in this Skype conversation, there was a Skype conversation where Armored Skeptic oh, Megan, stop you, that's slander. Armored Skeptic apparently got everybody into a call and said, I'm the leader of this community and what I say goes. Now, yes, obviously you could see him doing such a thing back in the day. His ego is large, but I don't think that happened. I don't believe that happened at all. Now, Tallytail, you make an interesting point there in the chat. I'm sceptical of salesmen. Damn salesmen trying to sell me stuff to which I question. What made these people skeptics? What were they skeptical about? Because I hate to go autistic and dictionary definition, but being skeptical doesn't mean you've necessarily made. Being skeptical is you question things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've made an actual opinion on it, because then you wouldn't be skeptical. To be a skeptic is to question everything. But as we know, a lot of the people in that so-called community had things that were unquestionable when it came to their own personal beliefs. So for Shu, it was clearly what was unquestionable was socialism and things like that. And for Sargon and me and others, it was unfettered free speech, it was liberal values, Western civilization, things like that, right? I'm not skeptical on that. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can critique it, but that's, that. Other than that, I'm not skeptical of it. I think it's a good thing and it can always be improved. I'm not skeptical on that. I'm not even skeptical of feminism because I think it's a bad thing. I made my opinion pretty early, I'd say about early to mid Gamergate, when I realised how bad it was. Anyway, I just got a super chat. Matt Whitaker just got here, so we'll catch up later. Long time viewer, first time commenter. Oh, thank you. Enjoy some of my tax rebate. Oh, you should have kept that for yourself, but thank you. Much love from West Yorkshire. I have family in South Yorkshire. Thank you very much, Mr. Whitaker. Much obliged. Thank you. Principle versus personal? Both. It's both, RKT. It's both. They weren't skeptics. I mean, they were the only true skeptics were the, I guess you can argue not the skeptics, the centrists, the undecided people who didn't know which way to turn. Because there were people at the time who were like, well, I can see why these so-called skeptics would say this, but then the feminists have this point. You know, there were people who were making a decision as to which side to back. Or at least what wave, what movement. Because ultimately, what the skeptic community really is not a community, but a mishmash, cobbleposh reaction towards totalitarianism, or at least creeping totalitarianism. It's a movement, or many different movements that appear to be one when it's not. So you've got the movement of the establishment, which is the Marxists, the neolibs, and the neocons, and all those people. But then you've got the rebels, I guess you can, because we are rebelling, all of us here. You've got your NRX, alt-right, if they're even still around. You've got third positionists. Then you've got liberals, centre-leftists who aren't cooked. There's also like early Tim Pool. Then you've got your ANCAPs, libertarians, conservatives, traditionalists of varying colours, because not all traditionalists are ultra-radical traditionalists, obviously. Religious people, although you've also got religious people on the opposite side, mainly of Muslim extraction, but also Catholics and Protestants too. You know, a lot of the Hispanic vote are Catholic. You know, they're religious. They're religious leftists. So that's what it is. But the people we're fighting are, broadly speaking, maybe except for the neocons, they're kind of being dragged along with it. By and large, the neolibs and the Marxists are pushing in the same direction, but there's a few, differences. But ultimately, they're going in the same direction. There's somebody I've seen has said this much better, but our so-called movement, there is no forward momentum going in a particular direction. That there's no consensus because we all hate each other, or we like some people but dislike others. So, like, the NRX are kind of, for example, they don't particularly like what they would call liberals, like classical liberals, but they're not against them either. You know, I when I talk to NRX types, I don't think they hate me. They just disagree with me, which is fair enough. And again, some NRX people are more liberal than others, you know. But the third positionists, or your Nazis, your Nazbols, the alt-right types, they hate us. They hate us, and they want their movement to win. Although it hasn't won, it's dead. But you know what I mean, the ones who are still around. The traditionalists, depending on what type, obviously want to try and conserve as much as they possibly can. Some of them who are activists want to bring back stuff, so they're counter-revolutionaries, you can argue. But even then, they're split on who their particular friendships are with, you know? But I think you get the gist of it. That's why there's no community, because there's a disparate group of movements that are reacting against the left and the establishment, and they're not united, and they'll never be united. Some of them could be united together, some of them, but because it's so fractured, because, well, the right, although the alt-right aren't really right-wing, and the third positionists are for sure not right-wing, they're leftists, but whatever, they'll never be united because of these strong differences. So there will never be a skeptic community, there will never be a united movement. Only one of these disparate movements can win. They can either make alliances with the ones who are similar to themselves, they're not enemies, because you can't make alliances with your enemies because your enemies will backstab you. And then they'll have to ruthlessly crush all the others and gain more followers and convince the people that can be convinced to join them. And these will not be normies, alright? These will not be normies. It will be other people who are, I guess, woke on these issues. Because for those of you who don't know, this is my example of what I'm trying to explain. In Weimar Germany, there were people who went from communist to National Socialist, from National Socialist to communist. It's those people that you have to win over, unfortunately. The people who flip-flop. And they're also, unfortunately, you have to win them over and keep them grounded, otherwise they're going to ruin your movement. I've made a video on them. Now I've got a super chat from Tyler. Hello, Tyler. Shout out to the Antisocial Network podcast. I was wondering where that was. I'm going to watch that later. Well, I'll listen to it. Thank you, Tyler. Go subscribe to it, people. I'll actually find it and post it in the chat for you, actually. Now, where was I going to go with that? That's really it. That's the gist of it, I think. I can't think of anything else that can be said. I've said all that. I've made videos on this constantly, like, over the years, and I'm sick of it, but it keeps being brought up because it's a useful boogeyman. The Skeptic community is a spook. It's an ideological tool to group people who have nothing in common with each other so that they can be picked off. Yanarex means neo-reactionaries, Zio. That's what that means. So, I also have another thing that I think I'll make a video on. It's purely opinion. I have no evidence to back it up at all. But I will end the stream with some advice and some observations. Now, these observations I hope will make a video in the future. So, I have hypothesized that there is a concerted effort, not just by the left, but by social media. Well, actually, no, that's not right. That's wrong. There have been unforeseen consequences when it comes to social media, and depending on how smart a person is, who, like, for example, the like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, they can influence this. Now, echo chambers exist, and they always have done, but increasingly, thanks to the internet, they've become even worse because social media amplifies it, because you can find your own little bubble and get into that bubble and just have a whale of a time. That's why the Remainers were so shocked to find that the Brexit vote went the way it did. Why the Democrats lost the election. Why nobody thought they would lose, you know. I mean, I think, and why Labour voters assumed they were going to beat Boris, you know. They thought they were going to win. It's because social media, mostly anyway, incentivizes people to form their own cliques and groups and not to go into others. Whereas in real life, you have loads of different people that you interact with, and you're kind of forced to, in a way, and that helps you, in a way, avoid echo chambers. Now, I think, potentially, some of the social media organisations have noticed that this has happened. This is not something that they created by design. I made a mistake saying that earlier. They didn't intend for that, but they've noticed it's happened. So now they're doing it on purpose. And part of the shadow banning, part of stuff like creating a skeptic community and things like that is to force people into echo chambers so they're easily controlled, and so that they don't have, so that they can't coordinate as well as they could do with other like-minded groups. And not only that, they lose their grip on reality, and so they can always be watched. Because if it's just one big mass that you know is here and you know is there on your website, you can keep track of them very easily. Now, it's gotten to such an extent that it's even, I think, breaking down into the smaller scale cliques. And this is where my advice is. I think for too long, the people who believe in my ideology, you know, your classical liberals, your libertarians, your conservatives, social liberals like Liberaven, who will be on the podcast on Sunday. He'll be on Sunday, by the way, guys. Who else is a notable social liberal? I guess it would be like your Weinsteins and your not Hyde, Sam Harris's. we need to actually get together and start signal boosting each other, because we can still game the system. YouTube may be trying to suppress us, but we can still play the algorithm if we do it right. They can't stop us all the time. The algorithm can only do so much. They can only do so much. They're only human. So we need to stop being in our little friendship groups with the same old YouTubers constantly all the time, and we need to actually reach out to other people, no matter how small or large they are. We need more people who are willing to put up with the autism and create community streams where anybody can get on and talk. One of the reasons why Gamergate was so successful was because of that. They created a community with these community streams, which got hundreds of thousands of views. That's what we need to do. The bigger YouTubers need to signal boost others, but they need to signal boost them in places where they're actually going to get numbers, because unfortunately Parler, for whatever reason, is not a good place to share YouTube videos. I think it's good for the streams. I think whenever I posted a stream on Parler, people tune in properly, but they watch the video on Parler. Say if it's a normal video, they watch the video, but I don't get the actual views. I've had the algorithm tell me that I've got 3,000 views, but I'm seeing it in real time and it's not 3,000, it's like 500. So use Telegram, use Twitter, Reddit. We need to create all these organizations. I know it's risky because we could be yeeted at any time, but we need to make sure that we don't just use the main social media websites, but every conceivable one possible, and signal boost each other as much as possible. Part of the reason why BreadTube are so successful is before YouTube decided to interfere, they were signal boosting each other. Do you remember that period of time where Kevin Logan and Christy Winters and all that clique, all those little people were uploading videos of other people and signal boosting them? It's because they knew they were losing the battle against us. And they knew that if they were going to survive, they were going to have to signal boost other YouTubers and themselves and create more of a togetherness and game the algorithm. And ultimately, it seemed to have paid off, although they had a lot of help from YouTube. But maybe it was that maybe possibly got YouTube to notice them, or maybe ContraPoints noticed it, then when she became big, she notified YouTube. Who knows how that's happened, but that's what we need to do. Obviously, YouTube's not going to help us. They'll do everything they can to stop us. But if the SJWs could do it, we can do it. So, it's going to be hard, and most of us will not practice what we preach. And it's very easy to fall into the habit of getting your friends on over and over again on your streams and things like that. But networking is necessary, and action is necessary. We need to find people who are good at creating organisations and think tanks and political movements, and who can teach subversion and things like that, so that we can actually enact change in the real world. Ultimately, we need to create an online platform, or there's an online network, so that we can then influence the real world. And I encourage you guys to watch a guy called Freedom Alternative, who's been on V's channel. He has videos where he teaches you all the tricks of the trade of subversion and agitprop to use against the left, because he's a right-wing libertarian. And what I've always tried to tell conservatives and right-wingers is that, look, guys, right, you're a bunch of defeatists, and you're defeatists for many reasons. One, you've been beaten for so long, all you know is defeat, and you're just depressed about it, right? You're in a mindset of, oh, we're just going to lose if we do that. First, you need to get rid of that mindset. Defeatist mindsets go. Second, don't believe that you can't do anything. You can be realistic and say, look, I can only do this at that. Do the thing that's realistic. And then when you do that, you can start aiming higher. We can do that too, Nikos. Comicsgate. But Comicsgate needs to create their own publishing companies, because Indiegogo's coming for them. But anyway, we need to do all the things I just mentioned. Then we need to start learning the SJW's tricks of how they infiltrate and things like that. And then do the long march that they did to us. And luckily, the internet makes things quicker. The internet is the reason why we've gone from in 2014 to hardly any riots and violence to all of a sudden parts of the United States have 90 days, 100 days of riots. It's primarily the internet. That's what it is. Now the internet can only go so far, but it is increasing the amount of it's decreasing the amount of time that cultural change takes. So for all we know, the culture war could last decades, or it might last a couple of years from now. We don't know. Well, Vox Day is also kind of Vox Day, stupidity aside, like he's got his own publishing company as well. Yeah, that's what we need to do, and we need to start publishing real world books, and we need to start our own companies and things like that, and get fuck you money. And once we get fuck you money, there's nothing they can do, and then we can start influencing society. And we only need 10% of us to completely change society. And okay, I'm going on far enough. So there's that. Anyway, that's all I've got for today, guys. Hopefully. Now the thing is, I need to preface this. When I mean their tactics, I don't mean like the worst of the worst, because Freedom Alternative, when I was watching this video, when he said, look, we can use subversion and agitprop, things like that, the best thing about us is we don't need to lie. The reason why the left are where they are is because they have to lie, cheat and steal. We don't need to lie, cheat and steal. We don't need to do any of that. We've got the truth on our side. We've got reality on our side. And it's very easy to show people the truth. Very easy. If you know how to do it. We don't need to lie. We don't need to add the immoral elements. It's only the ways that we all we need to do is use their propaganda tactics, but with the truth, and it'll work. I think it will work. So anyway, I'm gonna end it now, guys. So I guess there's a payment process and stuff like that, but there are payment processors who aren't PayPal. So anyway, guys, I've been going on long enough. I really do have to get going. I've got to edit a video. So anyway, until next time, I'll see you later. And also, I'll leave you with another little sound effect.
Catch you later, God!
See you later, guys.